Very welcome to this event at the Swedish House of Finance. The Swedish House of Finance is an institute for research on finance, concentrating expertise in Sweden, mostly academics, also a part of the vibrant Stockholm School of Economics community and the wider academic environment in Stockholm. And part of our mission is to inform policymaking in the financial sector. And as part of that, we love to host these kinds of events when we can combine people from all spheres of society. Just before I hand over to today's event, I wanted to highlight our next event, which is on Wednesday. It's the Finanspanel that we host together with SNS. And this week it will consider the question of the value and uses and potential risks of collecting detailed household data, registry data, and how that can further economic and financial policy making and decision making. So it's on Wednesday. Go to the SNS or Swedish House of Finance websites. Today's event will be moderated by Aurore Belfrage. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome again. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and friends, we are here because we have signed the Paris Agreement and we are determined to achieve our net zero targets in time. So we all know too well why we're at this pertinent crossroad. We have disrespected our planetary boundaries and we've created an epic market failure. We have not set a price on carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. This will not be an afternoon in why. This will be an afternoon of how. How to finance the green transition. How to collaborate public and private. How to navigate the risks, the opportunities, the international competition, and the geopolitical implications and consequences of the green transition. We're going to talk about how to distinguish fact from opinion. We have a star-studded lineup of thinkers and doers on stage. You will be able to use Menti to ask them questions throughout the afternoon because we have an audience with a lot of experience and many of you could have been up on stage with us here today. So I hope you will interact. My name is Aurore Belfrage. My disclaimer is also my credentials. I was previously an investor at EQT, and now I invest independently, mainly in the green transition with Nordic family offices, and I'm the co-author of Climate and the New World Order. I have the honor of being the Sherpa of this afternoon's event. From the scene-setting keynote from our former Minister of Finance to a fireside of academics where we will do a deep dive into the perspectives of research, followed by a panel of the insights of quote-unquote reality, the so-called bottlenecks of the day-to-day of the transition. The film that you saw mentioned costs, and one of the numbers that are flying around in the debate is $10 trillion annually from 2030 to 2050. Fact. But is it a helpful metric? Today I want us to nuance that conversation of cost, maybe discussing a return on that investment, and potentially what the film also mentioned, the cost of inaction. Without further ado, let's kick off this afternoon with a keynote from our former Minister of Finance of Sweden, Mikael Damberg.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start off by conveying my gratitude to the Swedish House of Finance for the opportunity to speak and give my perspectives on this important and timely event here at SSE. I'm very well aware that the title of this event is Financing the Green Transition, but my speech will revolve mainly around industry, industrial policy, good paid jobs, global competitiveness today and tomorrow. Why? Because ultimately this is what the story of the green transition also is about. Don't forget, industrial manufacturing and exports are what transformed Sweden from one of the poorest to one of the richest countries in the world. It is the basics of what we trade, high quality, innovative and sustainable products and services. That is what we have to offer the world when the world must transform. And as a social democrat, I take great pride in this. When I entered cabinet in 2014 as Minister for Enterprise and Innovation, the confidence among Swedish industry was somewhat bruised. It had been hit hard by the financial crisis in 2008, and the Conservative government at the time did not see any future for it. On the contrary, the Prime Minister proclaimed that the Swedish industry was basically gone. I didn't see it that way, not at all. Instead, we talked about re-industrial Sweden. The green transition was already taking off globally, and we were convinced that by implementing policy carefully designed to spur innovation, there was still enough capacity, strength, innovation amongst our businesses to get ahead and to lead. Now, there are many countries in Europe preaching industrial policy that encourage green innovation. Too often, though, that tends to boil down to more state aid. Not saying that public support to promote new technology is bad or wrong, but at the end of the day, we must make sure that the policy Europe pursues strengthens actual competitiveness and improves market outcome. State aid that simply subsidize or protect certain businesses or jobs will not make us richer, greener, or more prosperous. So what is needed? First of all, leadership and ambitions. I see a growing gap between ambitions in the industry and the hesitations in governments around Europe. Or let me be blunt. Radical right-wing parties around the globe have started a cultural war on sustainability and climate policies. That is dangerous. Last night, the election results came in from all over Europe. The extreme right strengthened their positions, although not in Sweden. There is still a possibility, a majority in the middle of the parliament, to maintain the Fit for 55 climate ambitions and economic instruments to foster investments and innovation. I do hope that this will be the results of the negotiations that now will take place in Brussels and capitals around Europe. The green industrial revolution requires substantial capital for the development and implementation of clean technologies and infrastructure, renewable energy, energy-efficient manufacturing process, sustainable transportation system, all call for significant upfront investments. First, to state the obvious, there is a growing global interest in green finance, with investors seeking sustainable opportunities. And Sweden is well positioned to attract large such investments. In some cases, we already see it. It is happening. But uncertainties regarding government's intentions and commitments, uncertainties on the future of carbon pricing, the Fit for 55, the ETS system, is devastating. Stability and clarity in policies, ambitions are essential to encourage and facilitate long-term commitments from private investors. New technologies always involves inherent risks. Innovations in renewable energy, green steel, renewable textile, battery storage, bio-CCS with negative emissions, green chemistry, green hydrogen have huge potential, but comes with high costs and uncertainties. Therefore, there are solid arguments for the public to get engaged, to speed up the transition, and to reduce financial risk on pioneering technologies in the interests of society. Sweden can and should also foster innovation by providing research, innovation platforms for testing and scaling up new technologies like Testbed Sweden. I would argue that Sweden are today at the forefront of the green industrial revolution. I would argue that Sweden possesses a unique set of advantages that might just give us a global edge. With already 98% green energy system, the lowest energy prices in Europe, and a world-leading innovative industry that are committed to zero emissions, we have perhaps a 5-year advantage to the rest of Europe. But we have to move forward. First of all, doubling electricity production with competitive prices. To ensure that Sweden can meet our climate goals and support a growing green industry, we must address a critical need, boosting our electricity production. We have proposed a new target to add 60 terawatt hours of fossil-free electricity by 2030. But achieving this requires a bipartisan agreement on the rules of the game that will unlock necessary investments. But I do not see that current government doing this or have the political mandate to strike an agreement. I don't think the Swedish Democrat will allow it. But this is not the time for a cultural war, but a collective endeavor that demands bold and pragmatic decisions in the interests of Sweden. To be candid, the most viable path to a rapid increase of our electricity supply with cheap energy involves both land-based and offshore wind power. These are the most scalable and economically feasible solutions available in Sweden the coming decade. In the future, there are more alternatives. I believe that it's crucial that we provide municipalities with the right incentives to approve renewable energy programs. Local communities should benefit directly from these initiatives. Otherwise, the energy production will definitely not happen in the scale and with the speed needed. Speed is of the essence. Investors do not like uncertainties. They need clarity. It also reduces costs. Other countries are now moving fast. It is therefore perplexing why we haven't in Sweden been able to advance with proposals that have already been investigated and reviewed to streamline environmental permits and other processes. This is important. But the green transition is not only about economics, it's also about people. And I think Sweden has a unique narrative to tell, with big investments creating tens of thousands of new jobs, showing the world that reduced emission can go hand in hand with growth and new jobs. Just consider northern Sweden, once plagued with high unemployment and internal migration of the young generation to the south and to Stockholm. Now boosting the lowest unemployment rates and tens of thousands of new jobs. However, our focus should not solely be on the construction of new green industries. We must also build sustainable communities. This involves developing housing, infrastructure, and make these societies attractive places to live, love, and work. Investment support for building rental housing can help ensure that there is adequate accommodation for workers and their families. These residents will contribute to the local economy by paying taxes and participating in the community. Green credits guarantees that we are now giving to industries should not perhaps only be given to industries. Could be extended to businesses, but also to municipalities. Take Boden as an example. H2 Green Steel is constructing a new steel plant. The municipality needs to make huge investments in housing, childcare, water, sewage system. But with only 30,000 inhabitants, not with a strong balance sheet in the municipality, this is hard. It would be most reasonable that Boden takes part of the green state guarantees. Some people still argue that the public sector do not have a role in the green transition. I argue they are wrong. There are numerous examples of catch-22 situations that in game theoretical terms requires a policymaker to change the game. For example, in order to electrify the vehicle fleet fast, there needs to be some incentives to buy electric cars. But no matter how great the incentives may be, no one will choose to buy an electric car without knowing that there is enough charging stations. On the other hand, if no one drives an electric car, that kind of infrastructure is not profitable to invest in. I believe that the most important role of policymaker in succeeding with the green transition is changing the outcome of the game. There is a lot of private capital out there seeking to be invested in profitable activities. If the government, although for a good cause, merely provides finance, and end up crowding out investments that would have taken place anyway, we haven't really made a change. But supporting technology revolutions, reducing risks in a way of increasing speed and boosting necessary investments to reduce emissions, society stands to gain. Like with economic incentives like the ETS, European Emission Trading schemes, or the Industrial Leap, a state aid that for investment reducing emissions or negative emissions from process industries. The green state credit guarantees for investments contributing, reaching our climate goals. All examples of incentives or support schemes that helps the society to transform, making more green investments possible. So, Sweden's potential is staggering. We have the means to reduce emissions and forge the economy of tomorrow. But to achieve this, we must lead. Funding the green industrial transition is one key. To conclude, in these dark times of war, of populism, of fear, I'm still optimistic of Sweden. I'm optimistic if we show leadership, if we show long-term commitment, if we develop more speed forward. I'm convinced that we can be a global leader in the green technology with a growing modern industry of tomorrow. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Mr. Minister.
Sorry.
You were about to sneak off.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you for that. While I was listening, I was thinking that the green transition isn't like IKEA. There is no manual, and by definition, there will be moving targets and goals. And from the private sphere, we're quite used to this iterative approach. Talk to us about how the public sphere has the ability to work with moving targets as it transitions. There are many that talk about we need maybe policy innovation as opposed to technical innovation.
Okay. First of all, the goals are not moving that much. We know that we have to reduce emissions. That's the goal, and that's the kind of mission that we have to fulfill. So then we have to find the means to actually reduce emissions. I think on the policy sphere we have to be more creative, because now I think one of the public arguments that are winning ground is that the green transition will be costly for you. And if the green transition equals higher costs for people with low margin after a cost of living crisis in Europe, then people will choose lower cost of living before green investments. If it's another story about creating jobs, business opportunities, safe jobs that actually good paid jobs that you can live on. And it's also about Sweden making an effort going ahead with Swedish companies having possibility to export and grow their businesses around the world, but also in Sweden, then it's a different story. So I think we have to have these kind of narrative discussions, but also talk if we have an incentive structure that actually makes diesel and petrol more expensive. We should support people that need cars. That's why my party proposed a support scheme for people owning a car. And people should get more money if they own a car on the countryside in Sweden, not if they live in Sundbyberg, because then they can take the tube. You have to be creative. If you don't take that seriously, then you will bring people against the green transition and it will not happen. I'm sure we have a lot to learn from other countries that actually thinks about policy changes that actually bring people around and brings them aboard to the green transition. But I don't see that many countries that have so many upsides of the discussion as Sweden has. So we should be able to do this in a good way, actually supporting people in transition.
You talk about other countries. Could you put this conversation in an international context, both in terms of competitiveness, creating jobs and incentives in public-private, but also this creativity that you talk about, creating a narrative that is exciting. We're joining an adventure in a positive way.
I'm not certain that there are that many good examples of the exciting narrative, but you see policy area where where different countries are doing interesting things. So I like looking at other countries, what they're doing, and how do you actually frame the discussion. I think we can have a lot to learn. But now there is a bit of a competition. US has really Biden has really made an investment-led green transition on the table. And we see it. Swedish companies sees it. They see that when they compare the investments opportunities in Europe and in US, they can count on it. And if they don't see that we're doing enough and fast enough in Europe, some of the investments will go to the US. But on the other hand, I'm not certain that the US is doing everything good. Their trade policies will be complicated for the world. I'm not certain that they will have the innovative capacity if they want to defend their products only with tariffs. I think in the long run, that's a dangerous road. I think Sweden has shown that if you want to be innovative, you should be able to compete with the best on a global scale. I think US are going the wrong way there. So I think there is a narrative that Europe has to find a way to actually move forward. This is one of the few areas where when you look at the global competitive index, where actually Europe can compete. If we lose out on the green transition as well, what kind of competition are we looking for in the global scene? I think we have to do our homework here.
Will you keep your microphone on? Can I ask you to comment throughout the seminar?
Yeah, perhaps not all the time.
Not all the time, but if needed.
Yes.
Thank you. Warm applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, for setting the scene, and your microphone is on, so potentially we'll call you back up. And now it's the fireside chat, the academic's perspective, and this is the core of what we're here to do today, distinguish facts from opinions. I'd like to welcome up on stage Christian Sandström, Senior Associate Professor of Business Administration at Jönköping Universitet. And Gustav Martinsson, affiliate researcher at the Stockholm House of Finance, Swedish House of Finance and Misum, and associate professor at financial economics at Stockholms Universitet. Thank you for joining us today. Christian, could you kick us off? What does the research say about financing the green transition?
So you go back and you used to have market failure and the externalities argument, which is well established now in economics. And I think that was further elaborated on when what you call a system failure, and this is what Mikael addresses here with a catch-22 argument where, you know, there needs to be a bold move here. And I think that's where a lot of the discussion has been heading, and therefore the government needs to push in a certain direction. So what I think I have been missing in that is the political economy of it. Sure, there is market failure, yes. There is system failure to a certain extent too. But there's also policy failure. And that policy failure we do not want to talk about collectively as a society when it comes to certain industries, when it comes to our current history. And that's where I got into this. I started to look at one contemporary case, which was ethanol cars in the early 2000s. Related to that, we had ethanol production that was protected behind tariffs, various subsidies, etc., which for different reasons did not work out as intended. And that was many different reasons for it, but basically we need to talk about failure as well if we are to set the scene right. So that's my take on this.
Thank you. Gustav, could you add on to that? What's your perspective? What does research say about green finance? How should we discuss this?
Well, it's a big question, obviously.
Yes.
So we have, I guess, slightly different going into this arena and space. So I come from a view of, so we have a research group, me and Pastor and Chris Antoman, where we study carbon pricing. And we study it predominantly from the view of how do companies respond to carbon pricing? So kind of the ultimate market failure and kind of the ultimate solution to that market failure. And so we studied that empirically using data so we have 30 years of data in Sweden. And I mean, it works to some extent. We see that emissions go down, and it seems to go down where kind of the companies can kind of operationalize this. But what we also see is that it's not enough. It seems like, and in particular, in the really high emitting sectors, like steel, like cement, like oil refineries. And that's because we have an additional market failure. We have the so-called knowledge externality in market failure. So in 2018, the Nobel Prize went to Nordhaus for the climate externality and Paul Romer for the knowledge externality. And when it comes to technical innovation in the green transition, we have the dual market failure. Both that we have the stuff we need to get away, the carbon emissions that we want to tax away, but we also need to expand the size of the market for new technologies, the so-called knowledge externality. And therefore, there's also an additional need for the catchword in academia, which is subsidies. That's a bad word for some people, but when it's warranted, it's warranted. And we see some examples of that with credit guarantees. We have the EU Green Deal. And so that's broadly kind of my initial starting point, that carbon pricing, while being the most important component, empirically we see it's not enough.
And what's your take on that, Christian, on the duality of the two market failures?
Well, as I started my introduction, I would agree with it. I think it's well established there. But if we do not think around the policy mechanisms that result in this, the political economy of it. This is what an economist would call rent-seeking or regulatory capture, where if you create these systems, how do you ensure that you distribute risk and profit in a decent way? Is that what we're doing right now? I'll just throw in a couple of examples. The largest wind farm in Sweden, Markbygden 1 up north, 179 windmills, inaugurated flagship project up north, is currently in some sort of bankruptcy proceeding. And we have found out that out of these, I think it's 8 billion or so in debt, 2 billion is going to be handed over to taxpayers. So how do you ensure that the political economy of this ends up in the right direction? How do you ensure that we choose to create incentives instead of targeting the wrong technologies? There are plenty of examples of this with the ethanol example, various forms of biogas, etc. So technology neutrality, I would like to emphasize. And
but what does that mean, technology neutrality?
Well,
in practical terms,
it does not mean that the European Union should put up 430 billion euros in money for hydrogen specifically. That is one technology, that is one kind of solution, and the government does not have the insights into whether that is the right way forward or not.
You're calling for a technology smorgasbord instead.
That's what a market economy with an incentive structure that deals with the negative externalities and the positive externalities would cater for, yes.
What's your take on this, Gustav?
Well, it's a lot of things to unpack there. So, I mean, one is...
Take a pick.
I take two picks. One is the whole notion of technology neutrality, that what we have is a neutral outcome. I mean, we happen to have a fossil-based economy that did not just land on us from the sky. There are picking winners in that transition as well. So that's one. And I would like to, if I may ask questions. So this, I mean, I agree, it's targeting technologies is tricky. And I'm not sure it's that super targeted as you made it sound. But how would you do these 430 billion of subsidies, or how would you design that if you cannot guide it in any shape or form?
So
it's easy to find where you don't think it works. Like
yes, and to a certain extent, I have defined my role as precisely doing that because I regard very few others have done so. And if you're not thinking about policy failure when you are to craft policies, you will end up with over-optimism. You just go through the media archive and you can look at the number of press releases, press coverage around certain topics. So I typed in hybrid. Now in 2016 there were 7 press coverages of hybrid, okay? In 2021 we had 1,097 releases of press coverage here. Is this a hype or not? This is an increase of 15,800% in attention around one technology, one project up north. Is that sensible? What kind of impressions, expectations are we building when we're creating something like that? Politicians go there, they inaugurate, there's a lot of rhetoric going on. Now I've seen so many examples of this with ethanol, with biogas, with wind farms, etc. So we need to look at these failures also and keep them in our mind.
I assume one also needs to make a sentiment analysis of those press releases. But if I shift the conversation slightly and I look at another press release from the World Economic Forum, it looked at global cost of climate change damage is estimated to be between 1.7 trillion and 3.1 trillion by the year of 2050. So I was wondering, what does research say about the cost of inaction? And missing the opportunities.
Sure, there is an opportunity cost here, and that goes back to Gustav's question here, what would I do instead? Well, I'm the researcher, I'm not the policymaker, but fossil-free large amounts of electricity is what I would see as needed anyway, somewhere. And to me, hydrogen is not part of that. Not specifically earmarking that amounts of money, no.
Gustav, what would you do? I mean, that's not what we were here to do, but you posed the question.
Well, I posed the question because you're very eager to say what we shouldn't do, but you really don't want to say what we should do. So, I mean, I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, I'm on the absolutely opposite side of this in terms of focusing on defining what is over-optimism versus optimism. I think optimism you have to innovate, but you call this over-optimism. I could spin this kind of hybrid Google search to be a great thing. That's awesome that a lot of people find this interesting. You could also spin it as a negative. I mean, it's how do you define these things? I mean,
But let's go back to the research. What does the research say of the cost of inaction?
Well, that's not a research that it's not really social science research, but it's huge. I mean, we have to act. I mean, we have to transition the entire economy. And I think as an industrialized nation, we have to really think hard if we want to, as Mikael was mentioning up here, if we want to maintain our kind of society, we have to think about how to decarbonize heavy industry. And as I said in the beginning, it's lagging with only carbon pricing heavy industry. And to point what doesn't work, I don't think it's the solution.
But what does the toolbox look like in the public-private transition?
Yeah, I have a fundamentally different view here. I mean, I think when I view, and we talk broadly about the green transformation, I think green steel is a great case study. And why we wrote an op-ed, me, Per, and Christian in October, was that we were a bit puzzled about this level of being so critical about this, which we think is a fundamental good thing. So when I see what research, mainstream economics would prescribe is a price on carbon, check, we have that, is now high enough to actually create a market. We're seeing these different EU funds that you can actually apply to get funding. You're seeing credit guarantees to try and risk sharing. And now we see that private capital, serious entrepreneurs coming in and trying to be part of this transition. That to me was the solution. And further than that, I don't know. But
Gustav, isn't there a role to be played in looking at the nuance, assessing the risk, being the critical voice in the room, and the theater of the opposing back and forth is a part of the democratic conversation, and I think you said that as well in your op-ed. But
agreed. That's why I said this. But I don't have to take responsibility of all the different views. It's puzzling to me, and I another one. I mean, what we wrote in this op-ed that we find it a bit puzzling that you take a very negative. I mean, it's easy to find the negatives. I can find. I mean, I agree. I mean, policy failure is important to focus on, and I think for sure that's what we need to focus on as well. But given also the urgency and just empirically how difficult, in particular in steel, to actually come up with something that can actually be scalable, we've seen that over time, it's the great lagger, just being a higher and higher fraction of Sweden's greenhouse gas emissions. To then focus on only what goes wrong, I think then we don't solve it.
We will let you answer, and then Bo, a question from the audience in a second. But Christian.
Yeah. In economics, you have the notion of moral hazard, which is basically that once you start to use other people's money, you take a lot more risk. If you want to, you can even become reckless about how you make use of money. And this is a problem when you start to put these large amounts of money there basically for companies to apply for. So this is an entire debate which was not there before we started to ask these questions. What does the distribution look like between government spending, and the private side of it? With regards to steel, we've had EAF steel for many decades, and it's done very, very well, and it's been largely something that has been driven privately. What I think we concluded here is it's the sponge iron part, the 70 terawatt hours, which is the size of pretty much Finland's entire electricity production. Where is that going to come from? Where's the opportunity cost assessment in making these grand leaps and statements when the iron ore up LKAB controls is critical for Europe right now? So, I mean, that's to add a little bit of nuance to it. And I think, you know, we concluded a bit that EAF steel, that's a fantastic thing. And the economy is going in that direction for sure.
I'll let you. But Bo, any questions from the audience that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, indeed. There's lots of questions. One that I think would be interesting to hear both of your takes on is equity versus debt. Suppose you want to use the public balance sheet, the government balance sheet to support, to invest or guarantee. What's the best form of that support, in your opinion?
Gustav?
Well, I mean, I think it depends. I mean, with equity, I mean, I assume you then mean that the state takes ownership. I mean, we have two, I guess, examples with hybrid and LKAB and SSEB, a little bit more on the equity side. And in the HGGS example, it's more of credit guarantees. I think that's a political decision, or a decision of I don't have really a great stance on that.
Christian?
I'm not sure I do either. What I do think is important is how you distribute risk, cost, upside, and downside. You take the case here with Markbygdenet, and it seems that the downside, it ended up with taxpayers. What a pity for them. Last week in Dagens Industri, there was news that 300 million that were supposed to be loans for green clean tech is now reframed into grants or free money, forgive the sloppy expression. So, I mean, you put up these kinds of systems of free or easy money to obtain, and there will be actors going to the jelly jar looking for jelly, and some of that is going to be opportunistic, and some of that is going to be crony.
But the extension of the question that Bo asked from the audience is also timing. The transition has different phases, and there's different amounts of risk at certain parts of the investment phases. Where do you see the state having the most important role in the chronology? Christian?
I don't know if I have any interesting thoughts on that timing. The very early phases, there is higher risk, for sure. Now I can mention again here, speaking of the sentiment analysis, that if you took hydrogen and you combine that with hydrogen and world leading, so how many cases of press release do you have in hydrogen and world leading? And that went up by 10 times, 2015 till 2022. 10 times. Do we have 10 times more technology projects now which have potential? or is this part of a hype and potentially a green bubble?
But let's leave the correlation, press releases and investment.
That's an indication of what happens if you're too early in and you're betting on the wrong horse.
What's your take on where states should take risk versus the private market and where they should hold hands?
Early. Obviously very early. I mean, really focusing on being like expanding the market size early on, trying to understand what is the problem, why it's not happening, kind of taking on risk in the beginning. But where I think it's important, and which also you find research backing up, that also once doing that, and I don't know the state of how this is going, also having a process of phasing this out over time, also to clarify that. I think that could be a nice way of kind of trying to set something up in terms of mitigating the risk of policy failure, to have some sense of now we need it, but we have a certain plan of phasing out these different supports.
But you confidently said early, and I'm going to go why and tie into what Damberg said earlier, which is the narrative and what Christian is also alluding to. Will this end up being carried by the citizens, or will they think that they're carrying it? Both of those are, it's the perception is reality challenge here. Like, why would you say that the state should take risk early in the transition?
Well, because we need to form markets that don't exist today, and therefore we need to do that early, because otherwise they don't exist.
And what's your take on the ethanol bubble in Sweden?
I have none.
Okay. I think we basically
I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I don't have a particular view on that.
I think we basically did all these things. We put up large amounts of money from Energimyndigheten to invest in ethanol research. It was a good billion that ended up in a municipal company called Sekab up in Örnsköldsvik. We ended up with ethanol production in agroethanol, controlled by the Farmers Association, which is controlled, related to the Center Party. And we had this coalition with the Center Party and the Conservative Alliance, but also Center Party and Social Democrats before that, ending up with ethanol. So Center Party had, since early 1980s, been lobbying for ethanol as a fuel, the fuel of the future. So the whole process is captivated by interest groups in a political maneuvering, and then you get interest groups jumping on. Gradually then the bubble burst because it was not good for the environment and it was not good for the economy, and the technology really didn't work either. So that's what I started to study a couple of years ago. Few people had actually looked at it. Most people don't want to talk about the failures here.
And just as mentioned, I think it's full respect, and it's an important role to play to discuss the pros and cons, etc. However, if forced in this, the cost of inaction, you mentioned green electricity as one of the things that you would do. Could you talk about what we should do? Where is the opportunity? How do we lean towards the transition? We have the Paris Agreement. We have an artificial timeline of 2030, 40, 45, etc.
But then you put me in the role of being one that should choose different technologies.
But don't we need to at some point choose technologies?
But I don't know that well enough right now. So I'm not sure I should answer that.
And if we wait and see and do nothing?
That's not what I'm saying that we should do.
So that's great. So that's something to work with there. Because what does that mean in relation to the international competitive environment where companies are investing?
Well, again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything. I'm saying this direction is the wrong one. And this kind of industrial policies which are converging with environmental policies are going to result in a collection of challenges that have been largely unaddressed.
Bo, question from the audience? Yeah. And the final question for you guys will be the wish list of the research that we need to look at going further.
Okay, so I like a question about research here. Someone has asked, what are the gaps of knowledge in this area where researchers should devote their time?
You took my question, that's brilliant. What is your wish list? Where will you be focusing your attention over the next 3 to 5 years? Christian?
Okay. I mean, I didn't end up studying what doesn't work because I'm particularly happy about it. I ended up doing so because I thought very few people do. And it's the same in business history and business administration, broadly speaking. And not learning from that, we're missing out on something. So that's what I think is interesting.
Well, I mean, what I would like to see, so what I have, kind of one of my main points is that I think broadly speaking, we're doing the right things with a combination of pricing out the bad, pricing in the good with subsidies and pricing. But as we all know, the devils are in the details. And these are broad kind of aspects. I mean, boring a little bit, I'm also afraid of policy failure. And I mean, studying how do you design the proper contracts across these different parties? How do you secure that you communicate a phasing out, kind of a more very like applied aspect to kind of these broader research-based kind of recommendations? That's what I think is a gap and that I think we should study.
Well, I'd like to commend you. The tension is palpable, and I think we will continue to have this tension because as we transition, there will be opportunities, there will be risks, there will be hopefully rewards for Sweden and Europe. Thank you. You will keep your microphones on, so potentially I'll ask you to join the conversation.
Okay.
A big round of applause. Moving swiftly on to the realities of the green transition and financing the green transition. And hopefully we'll be able to allow the researchers to join the conversation again, talking about the on-the-ground insights. I'd like to welcome up on stage, I'll give you all 4 names in one big round of applause. Karolina Ekholm, the General Director of Riksgälden. Liisa, Raasakka, Head of the European Investment Bank Group for Sweden. Niklas Ekvall, CEO of AP4. Otto Gernandt, CFO, H2 Green Steel. Welcome. You've heard the previous conversations and you are in this day to day. So we would love to hear your perspectives on your roles within the green transition. So let's start everyone kicking off with how they see their day to day and maybe in relation to the previous conversations. Please. Karolina, will you start?
Yes, so, the way I am involved in this is that I am in charge of the government agency that runs a program that was mentioned, I think, by Mikael Damberg, which is a program for credit guarantees for green investments or large investments in large industrial projects that contributes to the Swedish climate and environmental policy goals. So that's a big thing for us. And in this program, we have granted credit guarantees to H2 Green Steel, who's represented here, but also Northvolt and Preem. But Northvolt and H2 Green Steel, they are, of course, the really big projects that we are involved in. And in the funding of that project, the European Investment Bank is also involved. So we are all involved in one way or another. And I think even Niklas' AP fund is somehow involved in H2 Green Steel. So we are all together in this.
Lots to unpack there, and one of the things that I would like us to address is also one of the things that Christian brought up today. What are the risks? What if it doesn't work? How does this look? And how do Swedish citizens think about this, the transition and your role in that? Liisa.
Yes, well, you already said it. No, so I'm representing the European Investment Bank here in Sweden. And we have since 2019 become the EU Climate Bank, and we really have a strong policy goal to invest in investment that follows EU policies in terms of climate. That being said, I would say that Sweden is our role model country because there's so many climate investments here, and last year 75% of our lending were climate investments, and it has been like that from years to year. And it's really amazing to be working in this country. If we then look to the topic of today with the private-public partnership, we have been working with that from a long time around through public sector private partnership when UK was still in EU, lots of infrastructure investment on the public side. And what we are seeing now is these industrial projects that are structured, which we're discussing here, or renewable energy generation projects. And this type of highly structured projects where you take all the risk, or try to minimize the risk on the project level away from any corporate balance sheet, and put the risk based on who's best to take it, to supplier, contractor, off-take contractors. That type of lending that we call structural lending, it's about 7% of our business. So that in money terms last year was 5 billion euros. So.
Thank you. And one of the things that I think we should discuss here today is obviously both the why in terms of moving into a climate bank, and as you said, but maybe more on the nitty-gritty of how. What does that toolbox look like, and how do you assess risk, and how do you mitigate the challenges that we've discussed earlier today? Niklas, welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Please tell us about your role and perspective in the green transition. Maybe also putting on a larger hat of all the pension funds.
All the pension funds at once. Okay, I think I can talk a little bit of that of the situation for other pension funds and other long-term investors. So I think you can generalize some of the things I'm saying anyway. We are, as you all know, a public pension fund in Sweden. We have an investment horizon which is longer than 40 years. That means that ESG is very important for us, and we need to take that in consideration in our work. And that also means that we have a very long tradition. We have been working with ESG back to the 70s, 80s actually, and climate environment has been an important part throughout all the years. But then, of course, we have increased the focus lately. Already in 2010, we came to the conclusion that carbon is an externality that is not correctly priced by the market, and that then mean that constitutes a systematic risk to our investment portfolio. So in 2012, we introduced our first low carbon strategy. And then after that, we are taking step after step. And today, we integrate sustainability in all our investment process in everything we are doing. And we have broke down the carbon footprint in our investment with more than 60% since we started to measure things in 2012. I could go on forever, not forever, but for a long time talking about what we're doing. But the things that are most linked to the discussion today is likely the work we do on more targeted investments into sustainability trends. That's the work we started in 2018. We started to make deep dives into strong sustainability trends to understand the impact they have on the industrial sectors, companies and value chains. And the reason for that was to understand better how we could direct our investments to combine the ambition of giving good investment returns as well as supporting the transition. And that is something that we today integrate in all areas of our fund, and just the last 3 years we have made close to 40 billion into dedicated investments with that dual purpose, as I mentioned. And that includes things like you mentioned, that a fund generation that invests in nature green steel, but there's a lot of investment into wind parks, solar, other type of solutions that can support the energy system, but also in things like efficient food production and agriculture and many other things as well. And we have quite a substantial of investments that are dependent on long-term agreements and transparent agreements with the public, and a few are PPPs as well there, but we should then I think remember that very many of the infrastructure investments depend in one way or another on a long-term relationship with the public. You can call them PPP, you can call them regulation, you can call them other things, but that depends on a good relationship with the public where we share risks along the way.
We talked about a timeline earlier and who takes risk where in different scenarios. Niklas, what's your view on where the pension funds fit into the risk-taking timeline?
Our fiduciary duty at the end of the day is, of course, to provide return to the pensions, the beneficiaries of the pension plan. So we can't give away return for other purposes. But with that said, we don't find that as a huge conflict. There is a lot of investment that is needed to be done in the transition, and so far we have been able to combine our return requirements with supporting the transition. But there are certain areas where the public, in my mind, need to step in and take away some of the risks that the private market is not able to bear themselves.
Otto, we've spoken about you a lot here today. Could you give the perspective of H2 Green Steel and potentially also take the hat of technology, progress, etc.?
Yep. No, I'm proud to count everyone here as a stakeholder in our company. So we've, I think, maybe taking a little bit the longer, semi-long answer to your question. And also to tie a little bit back to what the researchers were talking about earlier, which is around risk sharing and how to create and build a structure. I think if you look back 5 years ago and you looked at startups and you looked at startup financing, it was mostly about equity financing and venture capital of different kinds. You were very, very rarely, if ever, you heard about startups that were borrowing money. And this is for natural reasons. You don't have a financial history, you don't have customers, you don't have a balance sheet, and you don't have assets. But it was also because many of these startup companies historically have been software companies or everything in sort of the internet space. So when we started 4 years ago, or when I started 4 years ago, with putting 25,000 SEK in a bank account and opening H2G's AB, we obviously had none of these things to show to Riksgälden or EIB in that case on the lender side. So we very early understood that what we had to create was to build a company from scratch that could be financed. A steel plant, which is obviously very asset intense, we would have never been able to equity finance all of that and to make a business case for a complete equity financing, nor would a traditional steel company today building a steel plant be able to put that together. And so the role that I've had in all of this is to basically build our company from scratch and build a company and specifically to build a creditworthy counterparty out of nothing. And I think that's where, if you look at both the project finance that Northvolt did and the project finance structure that we have constructed here, it is about how to construct, and it's to build a playbook of how to construct a creditworthy counterparty for institutions like EIB, like Riksgälden, but also, as many people maybe seems to be lost in some of the previous discussions, is also by commercial lenders, largely financed by commercial lenders. I mean, we have very little public funding in our structure. I have yet to come across free money in my in my time. Nothing has been free. But this has meant also because of the vast majority or the vast amount of capital that is required to put this in place. So our total funding package now is 75 billion SEK, which is 1.3% of Swedish GDP. And I think this is I would think as a Swede, now I'm patting myself on the back, but this is a huge success for Sweden as well. I mean, our ability to attract one of the largest and the first large financing of a hard-to-abate industry globally is happening in Boden, Sweden. And it is the largest startup financing in the world last year in 2023. And that's in Sweden. And that's real industry, real industrial jobs. It's not an app in your phone, for example. And so last thing I would say, and that stack of 75 billion SEK, how do you then talking about risk sharing? I mean, the success of that 75 billion SEK financing is really about de-risking it as a whole, de-risking the risk that lenders take, finding, in our case, we have 2 tiers of lenders. We have first lien lenders, we have second lien lenders, we have off-balance sheet funding, we have an innovation fund grant, and then we have a large amount of equity on top of that. So how do you construct this in risk sharing between public and private, but in this case, 95% plus all private capital?
The semi-longish answer, but you'll get more opportunity to say more. Bo, the questions are open, right? So please formulate your questions. Karolina, you had a response.
Well, I mean, I think there are quite often misconceptions about what the government credit guarantees, what they involve. I think a lot of people think of them as some sort of subsidy, but the way they are set up, they are designed not to be subsidies, and it's for a reason. It's because they were set up so that they would meet EU state aid rules, without question. I mean, I think this is an area where the EU is quite lenient, actually, but the guarantee is set up so that it guarantees 80% of the loan. So we don't pay any money to H2 Green Steel. We guarantee loans from entities such as the EIB or commercial banks when they lend money to H2 Green Steel. If H2 Green Steel cannot pay, we would take on 80% of the liability. But H2 Green Steel has to pay for this, and the way it's set up, it's supposed to be the price we charge is supposed to be sort of a market-based price. So we take into account our own costs for doing this. We also take into account the expected credit losses, so we have a premium for that. But on top, we also add a fee that is supposed to be what a commercial guarantor would charge. So in expectational terms, we make a profit from H2. The Swedish taxpayers make a profit from H2 Green Steel. I mean, unless the company goes under, it will be a profit for the taxpayer.
But that's a relatively big unless. So
Granted.
Damberg was speaking about the voter who is worried about their day-to-day lives, and if I channel my inner conspiracy theorist, will I end up paying this? Or how would you frame that conversation so someone that doesn't understand the ins and outs of what you do understand it conceptually?
Yeah, so you have to think about how the incentive structure, how you set up the incentive structure. So for us, of course, a very central part of this is to ensure that there is enough equity capital in the project, so that the owners have significant skin in the game. So the people who have put in equity capital, they stand to lose, of course, first. So first they will be wiped out, and since it involves quite a lot of money, the incentives are such that they would prefer this company to survive. I mean, that's how it sort of works. I mean, it could still go under, of course, if the technology ends up being completely obsolete. But we, from our perspective, we who are responsible for this program, I mean, the program is intended to deal with situations where there are large financial risks. So we think that sort of justifies the sort of public involvement here. But there's also a very large potential in terms of contributing to environmental and climate goals, policy goals.
And as we've spoken about today, there's also the cost of inaction. These investments aren't in isolation. We've signed the Paris Agreement. We're doing this for a reason above and beyond the return on the investment. Liisa, could you talk to us about these? I think Niklas, you called it the dual. You said something smart.
It's never happened before. But
it's on tape. We can go back and look at it.
Dual ambitions.
Dual ambitions. Yeah. Thank you. I knew it. How does the EIB look at the dual ambitions? Because it's a different type of math that we need to do. We can't calculate it strictly from a financial point of view.
Yeah, but maybe just to take one step back, and why would you as a bank go into these risky investments? And for us, if this is dual or not, I don't know. But for us, it's very important to support the EU policy goal for the climate, be it green steel, be it gigafactory, be it PV factory or any other, or offshore wind farm. For us, these type of investments are a very good way to support this specific target to meet a policy goal, because it's only that, it's nothing else. And also, when you are in these deals, it is an increased risk, but it is in an informed, sustainable manner. It is structured, and you can see it. There's some transparency in it, and with that type of structure, you can feel comfortable lending to such a project. And another thing which we don't talk about a lot, but because of the high risk, there's also an upside in the risk margin.
The return on that. And Niklas, Liisa was mentioning transparency, which was also one of the buzzwords in the film that we saw initially, and they flipped the charts from corruption to transparency. How do you think about that and the need for the public to understand why we're doing it? And maybe that will increase the amount of Google searches when we get to understand it.
Transparency is, of course, very, very important, both for us as investors when we try to assess the risks and opportunities of different investment, but not the least, of course, if the public sector steps in on the behalf of the society. So transparency and monitoring is key. But I also want to comment on the guarantee that you referred to, Karolina, and it is, you mentioned that we might defend it in terms that we have a greater goal. I don't know if we need to go that far in a way, because there are risks that are tail risk and other risks that are difficult for private investors to carry, but they might be diversifiable in the public portfolio as such. And of course, the socioeconomic benefits of that project might be more than the corporate economic benefits, and those profits go to the society. So there might be reasons for the public to step in, not for the greater good in that sense, because it makes sense. And it's those situations where the public need to step in a way to correct for market failures and those type of things that if they wouldn't take off the risk that the private market are not willing to carry themselves, or not willing to step into the situation, the public has no role to play. That's the role they should play. Then, of course, we need to have transparency and be able to monitor it. But the public, in my mind, need to have a role here if we should be able to make the transition or be able to make the investment into energy systems that we need. The energy system, as you know, that's the engine of the transition. If we're not able to quickly step up and increase the supply of energy, then we will not be able to make the transition in a way that is socially, politically acceptable. And the public have a role to play there, because there are market inefficiency, there are externalities, and there are risks that the private cannot carry themselves. So, just
I hear teamwork.
Teamwork, yeah. We need to bridge those different issues in order to make the private capital to work in the benefit of the society. Yes.
Bo, do we have a
I have a question for Otto. So Karolina, Niklas said no free money. You seem to agree that nobody's been giving you free money. So when did the involvement of public investors matter to you? How was it beneficial? Or if you flip it around from the policymaking point of view, Mikael said he was going to build wind power for you. Maybe you want a better airport in Kallax, or more housing in Boden. There are many areas where public policy could be helpful to you. Is financing important, and how?
Yeah, but I think there are these. So the first point is around, which I think we've touched a little bit upon here, is subsidies or subsidized pricing. I mean, even though equity is coming from a publicly owned institution, in this case AP funds, they do not invest in any other terms than any other private investor. So the cost of capital, whether it's from a public pension fund or a government pension fund, or it's coming from a private investor or private equity fund, the terms are the same and the cost of capital is the same. And then you tier through the capital structure depending on what instrument it is, where it sits, how close to the asset, whether it's secured, unsecured, or whatever it may be. They come with different tags in terms of cost of capital. And the difference when you look at a credit guarantee, I mean, one of the biggest payments or costs to our project are the credit guarantees, literally. Equipment, credit guarantees in terms of costs. And it's just it's a matter of paying an upfront fee to receive the credit guarantee rather than over life. But when you look at the cost of capital for that tranche where we are borrowing under a secure tranche, which I will be clear is not the majority of, far from the majority of the capital, that blends out to the same cost as a commercial lender is providing us at the same time. Where a commercial lender is providing us the same. So it's not, what I'm trying to say is, it's not about, I get to borrow from these public lenders over here and pay a 3% interest rate, and I can borrow from the commercial lenders over here at 5% interest rate. So therefore I borrow for 3%. It's so that's not how it works, right? I pay 5% in both. In the case where I pay 5, let's say, use 5% as the number, in case of a Riksgälden tranche, which is a part of the capital structure, maybe I pay a 1% margin on my loan, and then I pay a big upfront fee to Riksgälden for that guarantee to be in place. So whoever lends under that tranche pays gets a lower cost of capital, but has that guarantee product. But when you look at the cost of capital for those two tranches, from the company's perspective, upfront fee but lower over time or higher over time, it blends to the same cost of capital. And that's the key. I mean, this is the key. These are not subsidized tranches. So you may say, what's the point? Which is kind of your question. What's the role of the public institution in all of this? The role of the public institution in all of this is to unlock liquidity. Like Karolina said, Riksgälden is not transferring money into our account. So someone else is transferring money into our account. Who is that? These are the commercial banks. So they are lending us money. So ING, Santander, Deutsche Bank, and so on and so forth, SocGen, BNP, whatever. They are transferring the money into our account, lending into under these different tranches. So what these types of credit guarantee programs, and we have Riksgälden, but we also have the German export credit agency involved. They unlock the liquidity for us. And I think that's where the really critical role is when it comes to credit guarantees, and also the role of an institution like SEK, for example, to provide liquidity, not to provide subsidized pricing, not to take a different type of risk position, to take pari passu risk with private institutions.
And
always.
From the citizen's point of view, also get part of the upside.
Completely, of course, completely. Right? And then,
but the second part of Bo's question was also interesting. When you make the analysis between now and success, there are other infrastructure pieces that are potentially needed. And again, taking the hat on as a reindustrialization project, infrastructure, roads, housing, schools, etc. How do you see that?
I think these are fantastic consequences of one of the largest industrial investments in Sweden's history. If we come to Luleå and Boden and we bring thousands of workers, thousands of new job opportunities, we export for billions of euros a year, You know, I mean, we are going to pay. There's going to be so much tax revenue from all of these opportunities, and nobody's going to build a runway in Luleå for free, right? The airlines are going to pay to use that runway. You know, so this is all where I think the public can play a role, and this is where if you talk about what's the job of the entrepreneurs, the job of the industrial companies is to create business cases and business models that make sense, that can make money. We don't attract all of this money with a super risky, crazy technologies that may or may not work. And I mean, it would never work, obviously, right? But everyone seems to, or some people seem to think that's how it is. So these, I think, are positive things. They will all stand on their own legs, whether that's a good investment or a bad investment to build housing in Boden, for example. We play roles of signing rental agreements or try to be participants in unlocking some of that as well as a company. And I think where the public can support, or the public balance sheet can support, is providing liquidity for good investment cases, and to sit alongside private capital, not to replace private capital because it's too risky or anything like that.
Liisa, could you join the conversation here? Because I know that the EIB has created a center of excellence for public-private partnerships. We are here for a reason. This dance is complicated. There are different perspectives. Sweden has chosen not to be part of this center of excellence, but could you still give us a bit of some of the insights of your work there?
Mm-hmm. So this came along when we were doing a lot of public sector, like PPPs, motorways, hospitals. What else have we been doing?
Big infrastructure stuff. We get it.
I know, bridges. You know, there's one very famous one in between Sweden and Denmark. When we were doing this type of big infrastructure investments and the PPP schemes, and we saw that the government or the local government was a very weak partner when all the big law firms comes in and the private promoters comes in and start to negotiate. And we wanted to boost the local government and the government to also have a center of expertise where they could go to and have references and have support and advice and to support the industry, really. I mean, we are a policy bank, so we just wanted to support the development of it and maybe make it a little bit more fairer. So that was really the reason why EPEC was started, and Sweden has never really been big on public-private partnerships, so that's probably the reason why Sweden did not.
Could you share some sort of top learnings?
Yes, well, just out of my head, I mean, one of the things was that you should never do too small projects because they're so expensive when you structure them.
Because that's a great argument for you to have in the next round.
Like, because you have to pay for advisors, you have to have consultants, you have to have. So normally, I don't know where I have this number from, but I think there is a number that says a rule of thumb that you shouldn't do a structured finance deal under 100 million euros, because then all the fees sort of starts to eat up. So that's like the size. And then also, like, for example, with motorways, to make sure that you have the traffic there who will repay the fees, and maybe not put it on the traffic, but maybe do availability fees and using the government to support this type of investments. What else do we have? Well, also when things don't work out, to be able to have teams to be able to renegotiate, because this is infrastructure. It has to work one way or another because it's there for a reason, and to make sure that you also have the support to be there and build it up and not walk away. And that type of skill set is also very important.
Time is flying. Niklas, from your point of view, what are both your learnings, but what do you see is important that we do now? We've come to a certain point. We know where our targets are for 2030, 40, 50, etc. What would you like to see that both public and private do in this teamwork setting?
Wow, that was a small question.
Yes.
I will follow up on something that Mikael was saying earlier, which and also stress the urgency of make things happen. I think the discussion in Europe and to Sweden to some extent the last 10 years we're very much about setting goals and regulatory frameworks, classifications, taxonomies and reporting, but too little discussion on what is needed to really make a transition that is, as I mentioned, politically and economically, politically and socially acceptable. And in my mind, at the front and center of that is the energy system. We need to make sure that the supply of fossil-free energy, in particular electricity, is ramped up quickly. And we need to focus on that. And for Sweden, I would very much like to see that broad parliamentary agreement, or at least that the large political party in Sweden could find a long-term agreement on how to restructure and strengthen the Swedish energy system. And then we have all the things with infrastructure investment. They, of course, have sometimes large environmental impact on not least on a local level. And there are a lot of different stakeholders that you need to balance the needs of them and so of course, and there are different legislations. But the processes we have today to get permits or doing things, they are far too long, far too complex, far too uncertain. So doing something with that would be of tremendous importance, I believe. And as you also mentioned, we need to have incentive structure that the municipalities will endorse investments into infrastructure. Today, it isn't working. So do something there as well would be, of course, of huge importance for Sweden. And you mentioned that as well, Mikael. On the global basis, because we discuss like this, we tend to forget that this is a truly global problem. We can reach our goals in Sweden and Europe, but if not the rest of the world is doing their part, we will not reach the Paris Agreement at the end of the day. And carbon pricing, of course, the dream, have global price on carbon. That would probably not happen tomorrow, if ever. But anyway, if we could have a natural agreement on get rid of that still huge dependence on coal as an energy source and take that dependence down step by step, to eliminate it as quickly as possible, that I believe would be the single most important action for reaching the Paris Agreement on a global basis. A small wish list.
Substantial wish list. I assume everyone's taking note, including the researchers and the politicians in the room. Karolina, I'll let you be our last speaker for today. Could you also give us a bit of a wish list, what you want to see happening, and frame that within the cost of inaction if we don't move in the public-private collaborations?
Well, let me first note, I did notice that someone from the audience about public-private partnership noted that very often it involves that the private party set up or put up the funding first up front, and then the government pays later, and noted that why is this really reasonable given that the government borrows more cheaply? And I thought maybe that was someone from my government agency, because that's exactly our view, that if there is a reason, if it is justified that the government comes in with funding, it's better that the government does the borrowing, because the government borrows more cheaply than any private entity. So in terms of financing, I think the government should be in the front seat. But I liked the discussion, this fireside chat. I mean, the way it was structured around market failures and policy failures. And I think that's a good way to organize your thoughts in this area. And very often, I think when you think about designing various support schemes, you need to think first about what kind of market failure is it that we're trying to address. But of course, there are also these kind of policy failures that was mentioned by Christian. And there, I think what you can do is to try to set up processes that are conducive to rational decision making, and to have these kind of well-defined programs that also generates transparency regarding who applies and who gets what. And I think it's very important that when civil servants like myself then gets to sort of put details into what is being offered, that we think very careful about how incentives are affected by how we design these support schemes. And we want to also avoid moral hazard, which was mentioned here also by Christian. So that's my wish list.
Also a substantial wish list, and thank you for adding all of your perspectives. We could have this conversation for hours and hours because there's a lot to talk about, and there's clearly a lot of interest, and I know a lot of people in the room has this as their day-to-day job. We will actually, I remembered a quote from another famous public figure, Hammarskjöld, who actually said, "Never look down to test the ground before taking your next step. Only she who keeps her eye fixed on the horizon will find the right road." And I thought that was a great way to end it. We have a road. We need to fix our eyes on the horizon. We have dual ambitions, and in order to take this seminar home, I'd like to ask Professor Mattia Bianchi, the Professor of Department of Entrepreneurship and Innovation Technology at the House of Innovation and Platform Director at Misum, to finish this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to conclude this stimulating discussion on financing the green transition. First, I would like to extend a warm thank you to our excellent speakers, panelists, moderator, and to the organizers, Magdalena Emreus and the team at the Swedish House of Finance. A special thank you to our engaged audience for participating so attentively. Today we have explored a range of perspectives, including some dissenting views on fundamental matters. What are the risks associated with the green transitions, including the risks of inaction? Who should shoulder which risks? How capable are markets in driving this transformation, especially when the profit is not the sole or main motive? When should the state step in, and how? What role should Sweden play? Who is responsible for creating the necessary infrastructure to support the green transition? Who will be the winners and the losers? Where do existing businesses and communities fall within this spectrum? How much time do we really think we have for achieving environmental targets, turning profits, and delivering social benefits? And perhaps even more fundamentally, do we believe that the climate goals we have set for ourselves, nationally and within the European Union, are meaningful and worth pursuing with the highest priority? At the Stockholm School of Economics, we are deeply engaged in researching the green transition, given the complex interplay of natural resources, technologies, institutions, and communities. Our approach is cross-disciplinary and systemic. We welcome an open dialogue between a plurality of views. The fact that our founders and contributors hold different opinions on this subject underscores our commitment. Our job is to produce evidence-based and preferably peer-reviewed analysis. Two centers at SSC complement the outstanding work of the Swedish House of Finance on the financial aspects of the green transition, the House of Innovation and Misum, Mistra Center for Sustainable Markets. At the House of Innovation, we run projects that investigate the role of public funding in the development of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies, on the emergence of innovative business models around carbon farming, capture and storage, on how multi-stakeholder initiatives can reduce the risks, mitigate the trade-offs and the bottlenecks in the green transition. At Misum, researchers are investigating the optimal design of accounting systems to create more responsible supply chains, with a particular focus on extractive industries and transportation sector. The causes and consequences of public ignorance around climate change and the development of human and social capital in this major industrial shift. As a proud member of the management team of both the House of Innovation and Misum, I warmly invite you to follow our research activities and participate in our outreach events. What is clear from today's discussion is that we face significant information gaps and high stakes. The best approach in these conditions is to learn with humility and curiosity to avoid the entrenchment in rigid position, be it the critic or the advocate. We must move beyond simple answers and focus on asking the right questions. This event has certainly given me much to reflect upon. I hope it is the same for you. So let's continue this conversation together. Thank you.